Welcome to Home Cook Stories, the podcast that brings flavor and inspiration to your ears. I'm your host, Julia Darling, a working mother with a family of 5 to feed and an insatiable appetite for all things food. Inspired by the life lessons from my mom, I believe food has profound links to our lives, from family recipes that leave a legacy, to the culinary journeys that define our travels, and the food that shapes our culture and lifestyle. Join me on this audio adventure as we dig into delicious topics, bringing more meaning and connectivity to our lives. And yes, we'll definitely work up an appetite. Remember, food isn't just what's on your plate. It helps tell the story of who you are. So wherever you are in this moment, pull up a seat and tune in, because life's too short for bland stories and boring meals. Welcome to Home Cook Stories. Have you ever felt like what used to work for you, whether it's your eating habits, energy levels, or metabolism, just isn't cutting it anymore? Well, let me tell you, you are not alone, my friend. Whether we like it or not, our bodies are changing as we get into our mid to late 30s and on up. Today, we're diving into a topic that so many of us are navigating: how our mindset and relationship with food needs to evolve as we age. And to help me unpack all of this, I am joined by Dr. Ariel Haddad. Ariel is a board-certified OB-GYN, a certified menopause practitioner, and the founder of Helia Health, a concierge menopause practice. And trust me, I am both an eat to live as well as a live to eat kind of girl. So while we will definitely dive into the science of hormones and how that affects our metabolism and bodies, we're also going to talk about how to approach these challenges with balance, curiosity, and a little bit of joy. I know for many of us juggling careers, families, aging parents, and endless to-do lists, prioritizing your own health can easily fall to the bottom. So if you've been wondering how to nourish your body in a way that actually supports your lifestyle now, this episode is for you. Let's get into it. Well, Dr. Ariel Haddad, thank you so much for joining me on the Home Cook Stories podcast today. I'm excited to have you here.
I'm excited to be here and chat with you.
You've been an OB-GYN for 14, 15 years now. Mm-hmm. Most recently, though, have started your own concierge practice and really decided to focus on menopause. So explain to me, what sparked your interest in wanting to go this route and focus on this particular phase?
Yeah, so it certainly has been an evolution over my career. If you had told me at 22, I would be focusing on menopause care, I would have told you were crazy. But also at 22, like all 22-year-olds, menopause wasn't even in my vernacular, really, right? It was not something on my radar. Didn't even think of it as some sort of subset of medicine or something to think about. But as I progressed through my training, through medical school, through OB-GYN residency, I felt incredibly well trained to prescribe contraception, to counsel women on how to prevent pregnancy. And then once they became pregnant, how to take care of them through pregnancy safely and to manage postpartum and everything surrounding getting pregnant or not getting pregnant. I felt incredibly well trained for. Yep. But what I began to learn as I took care of my patients, and what's so great about a field where you follow patients throughout many years. I've been so thankful to have patients who I've taken care of from trying to get pregnant, through multiple pregnancies, and then entering the phase where that chapter is closed. I, and like so many other OB-GYNs, was just not well prepared for, what do we do now? What's next? Right. And it really opened my eyes to how I had really set out to help women on this very front half portion of their reproductive years. Yes. And that our training is very heavy in that. And then women reach this age where I felt like I had no tools to help them. And so I went and I sought out additional training there's some certifications you can get through different menopause societies. And I was just fascinated by how little I knew. And when I started to take care of women in a more deliberative way during that phase and see them almost the way that I was seeing my patients in our 20s of I'm going to be an active participant in how this part of my life looks.
Yes.
It just was really I felt like I could be very empowering for them. And as a clinician, I felt empowered that I finally had the tools to help them recognize what was due to hormones, what wasn't, because I'm still, helping teach my OB-GYN colleagues, like, oh my gosh, this can be related to hormones. It sounds crazy to think that OB-GYNs don't get trained in all of the impacts of female hormones in the body, but we don't. It's this very missing care gap. And so it honestly I had never started to do something that just became so fulfilling and fun. And I was like, I want to do this all of the time. I'm done with everything else. I just want to help women. And so, yeah, it's been an evolution.
It's interesting when you were talking about the emphasis on understanding and studying hormones and how that really does have a drastic impact on our bodies and our life as we're getting into middle age. And I promise I will keep it PG or G on the scale of TMI. But I do, to your point of, it was not on my radar in my 20s, certainly not in my early 30s. But I felt like I can specifically remember there was a day, either late into 38 or 39, getting into the shower in the early morning. You kind of turn and you glance and you take a pause and look in the mirror before you hop in. And I just remember looking at myself and going, like, she looks different.
Whose body is that?
She looks a little bit softer. Things are a little bit wider or lower. And I'm sure it wasn't, but it really did feel like a switch was flipped. And I wasn't doing anything different to my diet or to my exercise, but all of a sudden the body composition had changed. So my question to you, Ariel, is help us in layman's terms lay the foundation and understand what is that connection between changes in hormones as we get into perimenopause in our body.
Yeah. And like you said, it does feel like it happens overnight. And now having experienced it myself as well, the same as you, where it's like, whose body is this? Like this, you look at yourself. Even I remember looking at my leg one day in my late 30s. I was like, that's not my leg. That was only my leg when I was pregnant. It is not that swollen, or like,
yes.
Who is this? And it does feel like it's an overnight process. And the reason why we get this shift, and you'll find that I like to use the term, and you used it as well, of body composition, and tend to think about more of these shifts outside of weight gain, because there's weight gain, but there is also this disruption of health and metabolic health that means so much more than the number on the scale, right? And some women at midlife, their scale number actually doesn't even shift, but where their body fat is accumulated does. And so when you think about kind of this very stereotypical female figure with an hourglass shape, right, and a more narrow waist and hips, that is what we kind of attribute to a female shape. And what we see happen when we get these metabolic changes is we get more accumulation of fat at the midline. Yes. And so we get this, oh my gosh, I never gained weight in my belly, and here it is. And like you said, it's like I've done nothing different. I haven't changed my diet. I haven't changed my exercise. And for some women, it can be, hey, I've been one of those fortunate people who's never had to really work hard to be a relatively thin shape, and all of a sudden what's happened, right? Yes. And then for other women, it can be like, I've always worked really hard and now it's even harder. And so it looks different for different people. But the mechanisms, and I'll try not to get too into the science, I'll try to keep it simple. There's really 3 big changes that we can break it down into. And so the first of which is estrogen plays a very critical role in blood sugar stabilization. So one way to think about it is, what is something that a good number of women get when they're pregnant is gestational diabetes.
Oh, me with all 3.
There you go. And so blood sugar and insulin resistance, and the way we process that, is impacted by female hormones. And so what happens in pregnancy, we get very, very high levels of estrogen. And sometimes when they reach such a high state, for some women, that actually can act just like having a lower state of estrogen, where it impacts the blood sugar stabilization. So, but when estrogen is declining, and that decline, and you said around, you notice it around 38, 39, for most women, we get this kind of steady decline starting, sad to say, in our mid-20s. But then early 30s, it takes a little bit more of a shift of a decline. And then 37, it really starts to head down a cliff.
Yeah.
And so that's why those overnight moments seem to happen for most women in their late 30s, sometimes early 40s. And when estrogen is not at the same baseline level it was, your blood sugar stabilization gets impacted and you get more highs and lows instead of a steady state. And when blood sugar spikes and glucose, which is what we are processing, can't get used by the cells, it gets stored in a bank 2 years later, and that's our fat cells. And then when it drops and we get that dip, we get cravings. So a lot of women will say, I have so many more sugar cravings now that I'm in my late 30s, early 40s. Maybe I was never a sweet tooth, but gosh, am I now? Or for some women, it's more salty cravings. And so you've got this increase in fat deposition and then wanting to reach for some sugary or salty snacks a little more often. So that's one component. A second component is, unlike estrogen that has this very kind of steep decline, testosterone has a very slow, steady decline for women. And when we have this slow decline in testosterone, we do lose some muscle mass. And so that's the age-related muscle mass for men and women. And so going to see some decrease in our lean muscle mass, and that's where a lot of our resting metabolic rate lies. Our muscle uses some of that blood sugar. So when we don't have the muscle to use it, more is going to put in the bank of fat. So you see this decline in muscle and this increase in fat deposition. But the reason why this shift happens to us overnight and not to our husbands is because of that slower, steady decline. And so we're losing muscle at a slower rate than we are gaining fat. And so that's why that, body composition shift happens so quickly, is because of just how quickly the estrogen declines. And then the third aspect also involves that because of those differences in testosterone and estrogen, we all get this really lovely period, usually around these same ages, late 30s, early 40s, when we start to act a little bit in our bodies like teenagers. We might get breakouts more. We might start to get this is something that the teenagers don't get what we do, which is the chin hairs that you can't keep at bay. But we might get a little more body odor. We're really running a little more testosterone heavy. And our body as women turns testosterone into estrogen the most efficiently in our belly fat cells. And so it's like, hey, she's giving me a little more testosterone than estrogen right now. Let me put on some more belly fat to do that a little more effectively. So it's really this recipe of the differences in the decline of estrogen and testosterone that set us up for gaining fat more rapidly than we're losing muscle. But the combination of both is altering the composition.
The other thing that it makes me think of is not even just physically body composition, but even noticing changes in cognitive health on so many levels. Sometimes I feel like I am as sharp and as confident as ever. In other ways, I think this is where it comes into play of, oh my gosh, I'm turning into my mother, because the things that you would normally tease her about, kind of that quick loss of memory, I'm going into the pantry, and then all of a sudden you stop and go, what was I even coming in here for in the first place? Or the other one I have noticed a lot more often is not being able to find the right words that I'm looking for. And I've not ever been one to be either at a loss for words or being able to articulate what it is that I want to say. But there have been many instances recently where I'll be in the middle of a conversation or in a meeting and I pause because I'm looking for a specific word and it's like, oh my God, I need a dictionary. Now I cannot think of what it is that I'm trying to say. How much are hormones also then impacting our cognitive health?
So cognitive health is one of the symptoms that I oftentimes tell women. It is so rare that I see a patient who has not had the cognitive impact. When we classically think of menopause, we think of hot flashes and night sweats, right? That is something that even maybe us in our 20s who didn't know much about menopause, that's what we would have thought about, right? Yeah. So many patients that I see, particularly on the earlier side of the more perimenopause range than into late perimenopause and into menopause, have not yet developed hot flashes and night sweats, but they have the cognitive impact. So it's really one of the earlier symptoms, and it's certainly one of the most pervasive in that it's incredibly rare I meet someone who that has escaped them, whereas some of the other symptoms can be a little bit more piecemeal. And so when estrogen, and in particular estradiol that our ovaries release. Because when I think of estrogen, a lot of us might think about birth control pills, right?
Yeah.
And that we might be taking estrogen. Why am I getting brain fog? I'm taking birth control pills that have estrogen. But estradiol, that's our body identical release from the ovaries, when it binds to our brain receptors, helps with dopamine and norepinephrine. And I always tell patients this is why we get a little bit ADD like, because those are neurotransmitters that those of us with ADD already might be struggling with. And so, but my least lifelong ADD behaving patients will say, all of a sudden, I am flaky. I am missing meetings. I cannot remember anything unless I write it down. And that's because of that dopamine and norepinephrine piece that are related with memory, cognition, verbal word recall, as you mentioned. That is so amazingly estrogen specific that I can tell you in 8 years of focusing on menopause, there's one patient who didn't have verbal word recall memory, who could not, the word finding you're describing. And I was like, we need to study your brain. You fascinate me. Why. Because even the ones that don't get the ADD symptoms, still, it's that word recall that is so focal to this one particular area of our brain that the dopamine and norepinephrine piece ties in. And so, yeah, there are very real reasons. And I think that's very reassuring because some patients will come in and say, oh my gosh, do I need to be worried I'm getting early dementia?
Absolutely.
I've got this family history of dementia. And so I'll say, I know right now you feel like you have ADD and you have dementia. There is a very good chance that you have neither. There is a possibility you might have ADD undiagnosed as a woman, given the, underdiagnosis. But I think it's really reassuring for women to know why their brain is doing this.
It's absolutely reassuring and very insightful, because for those of us that are juggling multiple roles in our lives, you just think, I am not managing this well.
It is. And I think estrogen also plays a really big role with serotonin, which is our hormone that helps us to have less anxiety, to feel less overwhelmed, to feel less worried. And so I think about all of the years before I knew more about the role of estrogen in the brain and on mood, how many times I would see women that are at our phase of life who had small children and were busy, and they would say, I am so incredibly stressed. Like, I cannot manage this stress level. And I would say, well, think of all the things that are on your plate right now. And that is true. And those things do contribute. But I do have patients they will come in and they will say, I really don't have a stressful life right now, right? They are my unicorns. There aren't many midlife women who don't have a lot of stress between aging parents and young children and work and all of that. But they'll say, this degree of stress I'm feeling does not match what's on my plate right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really validating to not feel like, well, this is just because I'm a busy mom. And there's, because we can't change our busyness, right? We can't, that part is very difficult. And so I think it's validating to know that there's more to it than we're just not handling what's on our plate.
Yep. I think that's very, very well said. Ariel, we've talked about body composition and cognitive health and the roles that hormones play in that. If we were to go back to food's role in all of this, I love the stance that you take, and it's one that I wanted to highlight in particular on this episode, in that I think the American culture, by and large, or at least as long as I've been living, it tends to highlight diets that are restrictive. They restrict certain food groups or they eliminate other food groups altogether. As our relationship with food and our metabolism changes and things start to slow down, I recognize that there is also a change that needs to take place in the foods that we consume, but not looking at it from a perspective of, what do I stop eating? I love how you approach it and how you are guiding your patients on what should you start eating more of. And so I would love for you to just kind of dive into that for us a little bit more.
Yeah. And it's interesting because of the lack of training and taking care of women specifically at midlife and the differences in our body versus men's bodies. And you still see it today. There are physicians out there like, it's just calories in, calories out. It isn't easy. You have to be in a caloric deficit. Well, it is true that there has to be some degree of caloric deficit typically to lose weight, right? What we're really thinking about, though, when it comes to what's happening to our body is that's why I really try to never use the term with my patients of weight loss. I try to talk about body composition improvements and health improvement, right? And I get excited to tell them, guess what? We're going to talk about the ways to eat. And I know we feel like we're dreading that conversation because we're going to get told what not to eat. And it's really about what to eat and what to eat enough of, because you can absolutely have a calorie deficit. I just had a patient recently who said, I am eating 1,200 calories a day, but I will tell you, it always includes a donut, right? It always includes this. She's like, I make sure I stay to 1,200, but I'm not losing this belly fat. She's like, I'm maybe feeling like I'm losing a little bit of weight, but I'm getting weaker. Like I'm not seeing the changes to my body that I want to see. And so I get excited to say, we are not going to talk at all about what not to eat. That's just not going to be part of this discussion. Because if you eat enough of the right things, you are going to be too full to crave too many of the things that maybe we should be limiting. And I truly, really think that when you think about lifestyle medicine, one of the very documented predictors of health outcomes and longevity is social connection and joy and connecting and finding joyful moments. And that so much of that involves food.
Yes.
You know, when we think about social connection, we gather to eat, we gather, you know, to enjoy these recipes as families and to enjoy the Christmas cookie that our grandmother always made that we now make. Yes. Yeah. And so to see these joyful moments, some of the most joyful moments of our year when we gather with family, and to think about entering them from a restrictive mindset. And we don't want to strip ourselves of this area of really documented health benefits of having that connection and feeling those joyful moments. And so I oftentimes, when patients talk, I remind them, hey, social connection and joy, you know, when you're out and having, you know, that dessert with a friend or whatnot. But when I talk to patients about what we need to do, it's about getting the right foods in your body that are going to stabilize the blood sugars that are disrupting, that our hormone changes are causing more fluctuations. And one of those ways is to focus on eating enough fiber and eating enough protein. So by increasing our fiber intake, we help with blood sugar stabilization. So if you think about how to eat for diabetes, you need to stabilize the blood sugar. We need lots of good fiber. People oftentimes think of fiber and carbs together, right? They think of things like bread and pasta, but fiber is in so many of our fruits and our vegetables and some of our healthier grains. And so that is going to help with, we're gaining fat rapidly because of blood sugar fluctuations. And so that's where the fiber comes into play. Protein is to help maintain that lean muscle mass that we're losing and our body is trying to lose. And so we need to, at midlife, increase our protein intake to help maintain that muscle mass that we're trying to lose. And so we're targeting both hormone effects. I tell my patients, I don't want you to think about anything but how much protein are you eating and how much fiber are you eating? And are we drinking enough water so that our gut doesn't get unhappy with us putting these things in our body? Because it is an adjustment to eat this way.
Yes, it is. Is it 25 grams of fiber a day? Is that what we are aiming for?
That is what all women should aim for, right? And we definitely don't. The average American woman eats somewhere between 10 and 12 grams typically in a day. And so, and at midlife, I do try to push people to even challenge them if they reach 25 to get closer to 30, but the floor should start at 25.
At 25. Yeah, I do think most of us have a narrow view when we hear fiber, but there are so many fruits and vegetables that are rich in fiber. I think a cup of raspberries has 8 grams of fiber in it. Blackberries also close to that. And even the heavy hitters that I've noticed is a cup of black beans. Is it 15 grams of fiber? And lentils is 15. Chickpeas is another one. And so hummus is a really easy way to, right, get that fiber in, or roast them so you've got crispy chickpeas as a snack, and you can do a half a cup or a cup of those at a time. Throw them in a salad, if you will. So it's just, it gives you some fun to play around with when you know the right foods and you know the nutritional value behind them. The more flexibility we have to play around with it in our own meal planning. Another thing that I have noticed, to your point, is when I have put it into practice, is I am full, which is a fantastic feeling because I am both an emotional eater and a grazer. And so it's especially beneficial, I find, if I start my morning off right. And so looking at things like oatmeal or a whole grain waffle with berries on the side, or even from a protein perspective, putting scrambled eggs in there, it really does help.
Yeah, when I myself, when I hit perimenopause, gained 20 pounds and felt like it was all in my abdomen and said, okay, I got to start doing practice what I preach, right? And I do recommend MyFitnessPal as a great tool if patients want to start tracking what they're getting, because I use the free form of it. There is a paid that I think even goes next level. But again, I'm telling people, I don't want you thinking too much about this. Just focus on the fiber and protein, and the free version of the app allows that. But you can put in things like you said, I ate a cup of raspberries or a cup of blackberries. Very easy to enter and see where you end up with your fiber and protein. And when I was actively shooting for the 25 to 30 grams of fiber and 100 grams of protein, I felt like I could not stuff one more green bean in my mouth by dinner time. It was like, oh my goodness, I am so full. I had no sugar cravings. It truly does work to be so satiating. But what's great is that you're not thinking in any terms about calories, right?
100%. Yes.
And because the foods, such as the ones you just listed, beans, fruits, vegetables, high fiber grains, because they are so nutritious, and they tend to be low calorie foods, but they're nourishing and you're not restricting.
And it makes me think, Ariel, too, about how do we manage cooking and eating for our own health and health benefits, but also for a family. And so do you have particular ways that you put that into practice?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it's hard when you've got, a 8-year-old that wants to just eat a cheese quesadilla every night, right? And also can pick up when I try to do a high fiber tortilla, right? This is not the same tortilla, mom. Something's different. So what I did when I was actively really trying to shift into eating this way for myself, I try not to make different meals for my son than my husband and I. Number one, because I don't want to. Number two, because I really love us sitting around the table. That's something I've always tried to prioritize, is that we eat together. We don't have separate meal times. And I think what works for everybody, family is different. But for us, being our small little family of 3, it's, for him to eat alone doesn't quite seem so, so
Be very
lovely. But I love sitting around the table at dinner. And so what I have chosen to do is that I always make sure, and it's so easy, is that I will have chopped up fruit and veggies on a giant kind of shareable plate in the center of our table. And so it might be red pepper slices. And I don't care if they go. I don't care if this feels like a dinner food, right? It's like, it could be cantaloupe. It could be some oranges. It could be red pepper slices and cucumbers, just any kind of communal grab and go. And it's funny because I don't even bring it up to my son, but because it's sitting there, I just see him reaching for things. And it's like, I don't even mention, hey, there they are in the center of the table.
Yes.
And inevitably he's eating them, but it's forcing me and my husband to eat that way as well. And so that way I know he's going to also have something that he's likely to eat.
Yeah.
There's always going to be some fruits and veggies on the table that don't even have to be cooked.
Yes.
And they might be pre-chopped from Publix. They might be pre-chopped container.
I have tried to hide spinach in our food. The kids love smoothies. They love to have them for breakfast. If we're doing a smoothie that has frozen berries and banana and peaches, I will grab as big of 2 fistfuls as I can of spinach and shove it in there. And then it just, grinds it all up. And aside from tainting the color, they would never know. And so they drink that right up, and that's good for them and for me. The other thing that I have done when we're eating pasta, I will take ground turkey and brown it, and I will take spinach and wilt it, and I will put both of those things together in the Cuisinart, and I will pulse and grind it very, very fine. And I will add that into the spaghetti sauce. So it's kind of a spaghetti bolognese, if you will, ish. I don't care if the kids scoop it up with garlic bread all day long. Like the vessel at that point matters not to me. It is the fact that they are getting that fiber and that protein in, and the nutritional value behind the sauce is helping carry it through.
I think by, thinking of it more of the positive, what are they getting in them that's positive, and less about the negative, and not teaching them at a young age to have this very negative connotation with certain foods.
I love this philosophy of just make sure you're getting enough of the stuff that you need, and it will balance itself out with everything else. Ariel, I'm going to ask you a question that's a little bit of a hot topic, maybe just on my radar. But it does seem like recently there's a lot more in the headlines around alcohol consumption. And and so I wanted to ask you, as more research and studies comes out around the lack of health benefits in consuming alcohol, even if it's just a little every now and then, how do I put that into perspective against a lot of the information that comes out around these centennials in the blue zone areas of the world where they may advocate for that glass of red wine a day as a part of their diet and regimen. So where do you fall on the spectrum of the type of guidance that you're giving your patients and alcohol consumption? Is it a total elimination? Is it, there's a time and a place?
Yeah. So I look at this from, do you want what I should be telling all patients consistently, or do you want it from what do I think is real life and what is in, practicality, right?
I want the real life.
Yes. Yes. So to your point, I can't tell you actually how thankful I am as a women's health provider that there's more talk about the harms of alcohol, first and foremost, right? That it has definitely not gotten enough airtime in the news and just even from physicians counseling their patients. The reason why I, having a focus on menopause, have talked to patients for a long time about alcohol consumption is that when we think about hormone replacement, for a very long time, women were very nervous about an increase in breast cancer from taking hormone replacement therapy. And thankfully now I think in the media and news, there's been a lot of talk and the word is spread to women that there's ways to give hormone replacement therapy now that does not increase breast cancer risk. But before that was the case, and I was counseling patients on what does the study that has shown the increase in breast cancer with hormone replacement therapy, what is the risk? Well, the risk still, even then, was less than consuming 3 drinks of alcohol or more a week. So I would say as women, we are sitting around having our 3rd glass of wine, never saying to ourselves, here we are increasing our breast cancer risk.
Yes.
Right. But God forbid we went and got a prescription for hormone replacement therapy to make us feel better. We would feel like we were being written a prescription for breast cancer. And so I'm so thankful that there's more discussion about it and that there is this talk about a Surgeon General warning on alcohol, because there truly is an association between alcohol intake and cancers, and in particular breast cancer. So as a women's health provider and as someone speaking to women, that is something that I think we need to talk about that doesn't get mentioned. And so when it comes to, well, what amount is safe, right? Like, is it 0? Is it 1 glass of alcohol a day? Is it how many a week? The absolute textbook answer should be kind of what we tell women in pregnancy, right? There's no safe amount, right? That is what the current thinking in the medical community is, that there's the studies that show these benefits of red wine and the polyphenols from them. And we got all excited to think I'm going to have my red wine with dark chocolate every night and live to 100.
It's going to be good.
It's going to be good for me. Unfortunately, there's just not enough overwhelming evidence to say that we should be consuming alcohol for our health. And so, but we have to remember that there's never going to be high quality studies where you randomize a group of women to not drinking alcohol and you randomize a group of women and say, well, you're going to drink 1 a day, you're going to drink 2 a day, you're going to drink 3 a day. It's just not ethical, right? And it's just not doable. And so all of the research has to really look more at kind of observational. So people get diagnosed with cancers and then they retrospectively ask them, how much alcohol did you drink, right? So none of these studies are perfect, but when they look at them to the best that they can, it looks like any alcohol intake at all increases, even light to moderate drinking, which can include 1 to 2 glasses a week. And so but what I also want to keep in perspective is we all take risks every day that we feel like can justify the outcome. And so yet again, coming back to that kind of social connection and joy, and how do we see this big picture? is that what I tell my patients and myself now, because I grew up like you have, we're similar ages in this wine mom culture of
Yes.
to get through a play date, we have to have a glass of wine. Like it really has hit hard into that. Like if you are having a special dinner and you want to accompany it with a delicious wine that you can't wait to taste because it's from a region that you're excited about, right? Or you're tasting a new type of cocktail at a new restaurant with friends, to make those moments that you might enjoy alcohol really worth it and part of the entire experience.
I think
Versus if
that
you're at a fundraiser and they're serving terrible wine, don't have the glass of terrible wine.
not worth it.
It's not worth it. You're going to feel terrible the next day. It's not worth it. If you're kind of thinking about this allocation, just make it part of more of an experience. So that's my real life approach, is to make it worth it. I jokingly will tell patients, keep your wine budget the same, but just lower the intake so you're drinking really, really good wine.
I like that. I adopted that philosophy now.
Yes.
Ariel, for those that have listened and may have been inspired or sparked an interest in wanting to have better conversations with their OB-GYNs around this type of topic, how would you guide them on seeking out additional tools or resources? You've mentioned the app, but for those that may not feel like they are having those conversations with their doctors now, or not quite getting the responses or the answers that they're seeking, what's your counsel to them on how to keep taking steps forward?
Absolutely, because I think that many women feel a little dismissed sometimes, whether it's by their PCP or their gynecologist. A survey a couple years ago showed that 6% of primary care and OB-GYN residents felt ready to take care of women when it came to menopause. 6%. So it's a lack of training. It's not a lack of empathy and care on their part. Just to give their provider, number one, a little bit of grace with understanding that this is coming from a place of just a lack of training and education. But if if they're meeting resistance and getting solutions or feeling like they are being blown off, the Menopause Society it's www.menopause.org. It is absolutely where to start to look for practitioners that have a special interest. There's a directory. You can find a practitioner in your area by searching your zip code and seeing who has been certified. And they are really a very reputable, kind of the penultimate academic society putting out the current research and guidelines for menopause care. So that is the best starting point to find a provider that has a special interest.
That's fantastic. And thank you for sharing that. Well, Ariel, I have two rapid fire questions for you that I like to ask all of my guests towards the end of an episode. When you think about home cooked meals, what's your favorite home cooked meal?
When I think of a home cooked meal, I automatically think of my grandmother, my father's mother, who was Swedish and married an Italian man and learned all of his family's recipes. So always had these interesting dinners that would combine some Swedish food with some Italian food. So I think about her spreads that would include things like Swedish meatballs and stuffed shells. And and so I don't necessarily think of one dish, but I think of her table and I think of this really fun mix of cultures that she brought together. And I think of her dishes and
It so speaks to this idea that food isn't about a one particular dish. It could be the legacy that somebody has left. It could be that family time and that experience. So I love that that's what it made you think of. So I wonder if this will be the same answer, but if you could think of anyone, dead or alive, whether you knew them or not, who would you want to make you a meal?
I certainly, absolutely would my grandmother be on the table for that. But I would have to say, this is probably such a basic answer, it would have to be Julia Child. But I would want to be there with her and experience her personality and listen to her with her accent, prepare in her eccentric ways. I love everything about French food and French cooking and her story. And so, it would have to be Julia.
Well, you have a friend in me in that. And I would want it to be in her kitchen with those pegboards and how she has her pots and her pans and all of her utensils just on full display.
And I know she got really messy and dropped things and did all of the things that she's just so adorable for.
Agreed. I think that's fantastic. Well, Ariel, this has been a great conversation. It's so insightful. I love being able to highlight food in this way of self-care and health. And for many of us that are entering in or have been for a while into this stage in life. And I think just being able to leverage your expertise and guidance and bring this to light for many more of us. I'm just grateful for your time and appreciate you being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for listening to the episode today. If you find value in these stories, please share it with someone who would appreciate it too. A big part of why I wanted to start this podcast is to build a community of food lovers and home cooks alike. You taking less than a minute out of your day to share an episode, subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review is the greatest form of validation and means so much because it is helping us to build that community and connection with one another. Remember, a good story is meant to be shared. Until next time, eat well.